It's 1974. America is broken. The Vietnam War just drained a generation of young men and $1 trillion. Watergate just destroyed the most powerful man on earth. The stock market just crashed. Inflation is eating people alive. Gas stations have lines stretching 3 city blocks, and some days the pumps run completely dry. America looks weak, and the whole world knows it. But here's what nobody tells you in school. In the middle of that disaster, a small group of men quietly flew to Saudi Arabia. No press, no cameras, no public announcement. Just a deal. A secret deal. And that deal didn't just save America. It gave America something no empire in history had ever had before. The power to print money and make the entire planet pay for it. That deal has a name. It's called the Petrodollar system. For 50 years, it has been the invisible engine behind American power, wealth, and military dominance. But right now, in 2026, for the first time in half a century, that engine is sputtering. Saudi Arabia just accepted Chinese yuan for oil. Russia is selling energy in rubles and gold. A coalition of over 40 countries is building a new financial system to replace the dollar. And the U.S. national debt just crossed $36 trillion, a number so large it would take you over 1 million years to pay it off. Today, we'll answer 3 questions that will change how you see every news headline, gas price, election, and war. How was the petrodollar created? How did it make America the most powerful financial empire in history? And why is it finally, after 50 years, starting to die? Stay with me. This is one of the most important financial stories ever told. To understand the petrodollar, you first have to understand what happened before it. Go back to the summer of 1944. World War II is almost over. The Allies are winning. But a terrifying question arises. What happens after the war? After World War I, peace was so badly managed, it created the Great Depression, hyperinflation in Germany, and Adolf Hitler. They couldn't let that happen again. So in July 1944, representatives from 44 countries gathered in Bretton Woods. In that hotel, they redesigned the entire global financial system from scratch. Here's what they decided. Every country's currency would be pegged to the U.S. dollar. $1 was always worth a fixed amount of another currency, and the U.S. dollar itself would be backed by gold. Specifically, 35 U.S. dollars would always equal 1 ounce of gold. Guaranteed. This system is called the Bretton Woods Agreement. It made the U.S. dollar the reserve currency of the world. Every country that wanted to trade internationally, buy oil, sell wheat, import steel, had to use dollars to do it. Not pounds, not francs, not rubles, dollars. America essentially became the banker for the entire planet. This made sense in 1944. America was the strongest economy, had won the war, and held over half the world's gold reserves. The dollar wasn't just trusted, it was the most trusted thing in the entire global economy. For about 25 years, this system worked beautifully. But then came the 1960s. America started spending money it didn't have. The Vietnam War was costing billions every year. President Johnson launched the Great Society, massive social programs, hospitals, welfare, infrastructure. Trillions of dollars flowing out. Here's the problem with promising your dollar is backed by gold. You actually have to have the gold. As America printed more and more dollars, other countries started to get nervous. France, Germany, Britain thought, They're printing dollars like crazy, so they started doing what any rational person would do. They started trading their dollars back to America and demanding gold. France was especially aggressive. President Charles de Gaulle literally sent warships full of dollars to New York to collect gold. America's gold reserve started draining fast. By 1971, the situation was critical. America had promised the world it could exchange every dollar for gold at $35 an ounce, but there wasn't enough gold left. On August 15, 1971, President Richard Nixon went on national television and made an announcement that shocked the world. America was closing the gold window. No more gold for dollars. The Bretton Woods system was over. Just like that. The dollar was now just paper. It wasn't backed by gold or silver. It was backed by trust, by faith. Economists called this the Nixon shock. In the aftermath, the world panicked. Foreign governments started dumping dollars. The value of the dollar collapsed. Inflation exploded. America looked like it was heading toward a financial meltdown. This is the moment where most people think the American financial empire should have ended. But that's not what happened. In the chaos of that crisis, the most brilliant and ruthless financial strategist in the U.S. government saw an opportunity. His name was Henry Kissinger. What he did next would define the next 50 years of human history. Kissinger was not a nice man. He was a chess player. He thought in systems and leverage and long-term power. When Nixon closed the gold window, Kissinger immediately started working on a replacement. He understood better than anyone. The dollar didn't need to be backed by gold. It needed to be backed by something every country in the world needed even more than gold. Something without which modern civilization simply could not function. Oil. The early 1970s were the age of oil panic. The 1973 Arab-Israeli War triggered an oil embargo. Arab nations refused to sell oil to countries that supported Israel, including the United States. Gas prices quadrupled overnight. Heating oil disappeared. The American economy went into a tailspin. The power of oil-producing nations had never been clearer. But Kissinger saw something else. He saw leverage. In 1974, Kissinger flew to Saudi Arabia for secret meetings. What happened in those meetings was never officially confirmed for decades. The full details only became public years later. But here is what we know was agreed. The deal had two sides. America's offer to Saudi Arabia: we will protect you permanently. The U.S. military will guarantee the security of the Saudi royal family against any threat, from Iran, Iraq, or internal revolution. We will sell you weapons. We will train your military. We will park our navy in the Persian Gulf. You will never be overthrown. For a royal family surrounded by hostile neighbors and worried about revolution, this was an extraordinary offer. Saudi Arabia's offer to America: we will price all Saudi oil exclusively in U.S. dollars, and we will convince the other OPEC nations to do the same. Every barrel of oil sold by the Arab world will require buyers to first acquire U.S. dollars. There was one more part to the deal that was just as important. Saudi Arabia would take the billions of dollars it earned from oil sales and invest them back into the United States. Buy U.S. Treasury bonds. Keep those dollars circulating inside the American financial system. This is called petrodollar recycling. And it was genius. Think about what this deal actually meant. Before the petrodollar, countries held gold as their reserve currency. After the petrodollar, what did every country need more than anything else? Oil. Because without oil, your factories stop. Your military stops. Your economy stops. And to buy oil, any oil from anywhere in the Middle East, you needed U.S. dollars first. Suddenly, every country on earth had to keep large reserves of U.S. dollars, not because they trusted America's paper money, not because they loved America, but because they had no choice. They needed oil, and oil only accepted dollars. America had just replaced the gold standard with an oil standard. And unlike gold, which was a finite physical thing, oil was something that could be controlled politically, through alliances, through military power, through the threat of force. The petrodollar wasn't just a financial agreement. It was a new kind of empire. Not an empire of territory. Not an empire of direct colonization. An empire of currency. By June 1974, the deal was effectively in place. OPEC nations agreed to price oil in dollars. The U.S. Treasury and Federal Reserve could now print dollars, enormous quantities of dollars, and the world was obligated to absorb them. Because without dollars you couldn't buy oil, and without oil you couldn't survive. America had just made the entire world dependent on its paper money, forever. Or so they thought. Now I want you to really understand what the petrodollar gave America, because I don't think most Americans truly grasp it. There's a French term that economists use. It's called exorbitant privilege. It was coined by French Finance Minister Valéry Giscard d'Estaing in the 1960s. He meant it as a complaint. He was angry at America because the U.S. had a power that no other country in the world possessed. The power to print money and have the whole world pay for it. Let me explain this very simply. When you or I spend more money than we earn, we go into debt, and that debt is real. You have to pay it back with interest, or eventually everything collapses. But when America spent more money than it earned, something different happened. America could simply print more dollars. And because the world needed dollars to buy oil, those dollars would flow out, get absorbed into global trade, and never really come back to haunt America. The inflation that should have hit America, the economic reckoning that should have come from decades of overspending, got spread across the entire world instead. Every country holding dollar reserves was quietly subsidizing American spending. This is not an exaggeration. This is exactly what happened. Let me give you a concrete example. When America fought the Iraq War, the cost was roughly $2 trillion. That's $2 trillion that America, through deficit spending and money printing, essentially borrowed from the future. In any normal country, that kind of spending would cause catastrophic inflation and currency collapse. But because of the petrodollar, other countries kept buying U.S. Treasury bonds. They kept holding dollars in reserve. They kept absorbing the financial shock of American overspending. Japan, China, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, they effectively loaned America the money to fight a war, not because they wanted to, but because their entire trade system depended on holding U.S. dollars. And America could repay those loans in dollars that it printed. This is what exorbitant privilege actually means in practice. But the petrodollar did more than just fund America's wars and deficits. It built the entire American financial system as we know it. Because petrodollar recycling, the system where Saudi Arabia and other oil producers invested their dollar revenues back into U.S. assets, created a constant flood of capital into American financial markets. That capital funded Wall Street. It funded American banks. It funded the growth of the entire U.S. financial sector, which by the 1980s and 1990s had become the largest and most powerful in the world. The petrodollar is why New York became the global financial capital, why Wall Street became the center of the universe, why American banks were so massive they were literally called too big to fail. And the petrodollar gave America something else, something that many people overlook: military dominance. Think about it. The U.S. spends more on its military than the next 10 countries combined. How? Because it can finance that spending through dollar printing and treasury bond sales to foreign governments, who are forced to hold dollars. The petrodollar essentially gave America a permanent military subsidy from the rest of the world. And here's where it gets really dark. Any country that tried to opt out of the petrodollar system, any leader who tried to sell oil in a different currency, found themselves in America's crosshairs. Saddam Hussein announced in 2000 that Iraq would start selling oil in euros. In 2003, America invaded Iraq. Muammar Gaddafi proposed a gold-backed African currency called the dinar, designed to replace the dollar in African oil trade. In 2011, NATO bombed Libya into chaos. Was that the only reason for those interventions? No. Were there other political factors? Of course. But was the petrodollar connection a coincidence? Every serious economist and geopolitical analyst will tell you it was not. The petrodollar system was not just economic policy. It was enforced at the barrel of a gun. And for decades, it worked. Completely. Absolutely. The dollar was untouchable. But then, something started to change. No empire lasts forever, and the petrodollar system had a fatal flaw built into it from the very beginning. A flaw that Henry Kissinger either didn't see or chose to ignore. Here it is. If every country in the world needs dollars to buy oil, then every country in the world will eventually figure out that the safest thing they can do is reduce that dependence. Because holding dollars means trusting America. It means trusting that America won't abuse its exorbitant privilege. It means trusting that America won't weaponize the dollar against you. And for a while, America was trustworthy enough that the world accepted the arrangement. But slowly, over decades, America started making mistakes. The first crack came from overreach. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, America became the world's only superpower. And with no rival to check its behavior, America started using the dollar as a weapon. Economic sanctions, financial exclusions, freezing foreign assets held in American banks. The U.S. Treasury Department became essentially a tool of foreign policy, threatening any country that disobeyed American wishes with being cut off from the global dollar system. And other countries watched and took notes. The second crack came from Iraq. The 2003 Iraq War was one of the most consequential events in modern financial history, not just because of what it did to Iraq, but because of what it did to America's credibility. The weapons of mass destruction that justified the invasion didn't exist. The entire world knew it. And when it became clear that one of the primary reasons for the invasion may have been about oil and dollar dominance, the trust that underpinned the petrodollar system began to erode. China, Russia, and dozens of developing nations began quietly asking, if America is willing to go to war to protect the petrodollar, what are they willing to do to us if we challenge it? The third crack came in 2008. The global financial crisis was a catastrophe created almost entirely by American banks, American financial products, and American regulatory failure. Toxic mortgage securities created on Wall Street spread to financial systems all over the world, wiping out savings, destroying jobs, and causing recessions from Iceland to Indonesia. And what did America do? It bailed out its banks. It printed trillions of dollars. It absorbed the losses at home and let the rest of the world absorb the consequences abroad. Countries that had trusted the dollar, that had put their national savings into U.S. Treasury bonds and American financial products, lost billions. The message was unmistakable. America will protect itself first. Always. And the fourth crack, the one that broke everything wide open, came in 2022. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States and its allies responded with an unprecedented financial weapon. They froze $300 billion in Russian central bank reserves, dollars and euros that Russia had been storing as savings for decades, playing by the rules of the international financial system. Gone, frozen, effectively confiscated. Now you can argue about whether Russia deserved it. That's a separate debate. But here's what every other country in the world, including America's allies, saw that day. If you keep your savings in dollars and America decides it doesn't like your government, America can take your money. China, which holds over $1 trillion in U.S. Treasury bonds, immediately accelerated its de-dollarization plans. Saudi Arabia started openly discussing yuan-denominated oil deals. India started trading with Russia in rupees. Brazil and Argentina began exploring trade settlement without dollars. Even France's Emmanuel Macron, not exactly a radical, gave a speech in April 2023 urging Europe to reduce its dependence on the U.S. dollar and avoid being caught in conflicts between America and China. The dam hadn't broken yet, but the cracks were everywhere, and now we arrive at the present moment. Because what has happened in the last 2 years is not slow erosion anymore. This is acceleration. In 2023, Saudi Arabia officially joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a geopolitical bloc led by China and Russia that explicitly positions itself as a counterweight to American-led institutions. In 2024, Saudi Arabia allowed yuan-denominated oil contracts to begin at scale, the first major cracks in the exclusively dollar-based oil trade that has defined global finance since 1974. BRICS, originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, expanded in 2024 to include Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iran, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Argentina. That's a bloc that now represents roughly 40% of the world's population and a growing share of global GDP. And they are actively working to build trade settlement systems that bypass the U.S. dollar entirely. China and Russia have already settled most of their bilateral trade in yuan and rubles. India and Russia settled oil deals in rupees. The infrastructure of dollar-free international trade is being built, brick by brick, deal by deal, right now. And here's the number that should make every American sit up straight. In 2001, the U.S. dollar made up approximately 73% of global foreign exchange reserves. By 2024, that figure had dropped to around 58%. That's a 15 percentage point drop in 23 years. That might sound like a small number. It is not. In global reserve currency terms, that is a seismic shift, and it's accelerating. Meanwhile, what is happening to American debt? The U.S. national debt crossed $36 trillion in 2025. The interest alone on that debt, just the interest, costs over $1 trillion per year. That's more than the entire U.S. defense budget. America is now the largest debtor nation in the history of the world, and it depends on the rest of the world continuing to buy its debt to stay afloat. But what happens when the rest of the world decides they don't want dollars anymore? What happens when the demand for U.S. Treasury bonds starts to fall? Because fewer countries need dollars to buy oil? The answer is inflation. Massive inflation. Because when dollars stop being absorbed by global trade, when they start coming home, they have to go somewhere. And they go into prices. Food, gas, housing, everything you buy. You think inflation was bad in 2022? That was with the petrodollar still largely intact. Imagine what happens when the petrodollar truly dies. I want to be careful here. I'm not predicting a specific date. I'm not saying the dollar collapses tomorrow. The dollar is still the dominant reserve currency. American financial markets are still the deepest and most liquid in the world. These things don't change overnight, but the direction is unmistakable. The petrodollar, the system that gave America 50 years of extraordinary privilege, is being unwound. Not in a single dramatic moment. In 1,000 small decisions being made by governments, banks, and trading desks all around the world every single day. And here's the uncomfortable truth that most Americans are completely unprepared for. Your standard of living, your ability to buy cheap imported goods, to borrow money at low rates, to have a government that funds wars and social programs, simultaneously without destroying the economy. All of that has been subsidized by the petrodollar system. When that subsidy ends, the bill comes due. So what can you actually do? Pay attention to gold. Central banks around the world are buying gold at record levels. In 2024, central banks collectively bought more gold than at any point in history. They know something. When the institutions that manage national money start moving their wealth out of paper assets and into gold, that's a signal worth understanding. Pay attention to commodity-linked assets. In a world where the dollar's purchasing power is declining, things of real physical value, energy, metals, farmland, water, tend to hold or gain value. Pay attention to debt. The petrodollar era made debt artificially cheap for Americans. As that era ends, the cost of carrying debt, personal debt, mortgage debt, student loan debt will likely rise. And most importantly, understand the system, because the single biggest advantage any person can have in the financial upheaval that's coming is simply understanding what's happening and why. Most people will watch their living standards decline without understanding the underlying cause. They'll blame the president. They'll blame inflation. They'll blame whoever is convenient. They won't see the 50-year structural shift that's actually responsible, but you now understand it. Let me end with this. The petrodollar was not the first time a great power backed its currency with something the world needed. The British Empire backed the pound sterling with the power of global trade routes they controlled. The Roman Empire backed the denarius with the size of their military and the depth of their markets. Spain backed the real with silver pulled from South American mines. In every single case, without exception, when the underlying power that backed the currency began to erode, the currency followed. Not immediately, not in a straight line, but inevitably. Henry Kissinger, the man who architected the petrodollar, reportedly said in his later years that no currency in history has maintained reserve status forever. He built the system. He knew it wouldn't last. The question was never whether the petrodollar would end. The question has always been, what comes after? And the answer to that question will shape the financial lives of every American alive today, their children and their grandchildren. The deal made in that Saudi desert in 1974 gave America 50 years of extraordinary power. And now, in 2026, we are watching in real time as that power is renegotiated. The world is not ending, but it is changing. And the people who understand how and why will navigate it. The people who don't will be surprised. Don't be surprised. If you found this useful, share it with someone who thinks about money, about geopolitics, about the future. This is the kind of history they don't teach in school, but it's the kind that determines everything. I'll see you in the next one.